Hello and welcome back for another episode of Write America. This literary series was dreamed up by author Roger Rosenblatt in an effort to bridge the great divide in our country through readings and conversations from award-winning, nationally renowned authors and new and emerging writers. My name is Bridget, and I'm filling in for Lauren as your host for the evening. If you're not familiar with us, Book Review is Long Island's largest independent bookstore. We have a great episode in store for you tonight featuring readings from writers Elizabeth Hawes Weinstock, David Tomas Martinez, and Kate Lehrer. If you missed last week's episode with Gregory Pardlow and Robert Lipsyte, or any of the previous episodes of Write America, you can go to Book Review's Crowdcast channel and watch the recordings at any time. Tonight's episode is also being recorded, so if you missed something, you can always go back and watch the episode again. Now, before we get started with the readings, there's a few things I'd like to show you about Crowdcast that you'll need to know for the event tonight. Below the screen, there's the buy button where you can buy signed book-plated copies of the selected works of each of our writers. Also down, there is the Ask a Question button where you can ask a question and we will answer it later in the conversation portion of the event. And also to your right, there is the chat feature where you can speak amongst yourselves throughout the event. All right, so our first reader tonight is Elizabeth Hawes Weinstock. Elizabeth has been a writer since her early days at The New Yorker, drawn particularly to the arts and urban culture, gradually working her way from journalism to longer narratives. Elizabeth is the author of Camus, A Romance, and New York, New York, How the Apartment House Transformed the Life of the City, 1869 to 1930. A former staff member and contributor to The New Yorker, she's also written for the New York Times Magazine and Book Review, The Nation, and numerous other publications. Please welcome to the screen Elizabeth Hawes Weinstock. All right. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi.
Thank you for being here with us.
Hi.
I will let you.
I didn't hear that.
I said I'll let you get started.
Oh, okay. Then I will.
Okay.
Then I will. I do hear an echo, but maybe it'll go away. I had expected echo. I had expected that tonight I would read from one of my recent books. It's a little unnerving to be echoing, but then a few months ago, I don't know, can we fix that? Brigitte?
Hi, sorry. You sound okay to me, so it might just be on your end.
Anything I can do?
Are you wearing headphones?
Yes.
You are?
Yes.
I
can just plow through.
Yeah, if it doesn't
I'm not hearing anything.
Oh, you're not hearing anything?
No, I'm not hearing any echo either, so.
Oh, okay.
All
right.
I will just keep going and plow through.
Okay. All right. You sound great.
I said that tonight I would read from one of my recent books. But then as I was looking through my earlier work, trying to restore some order to my study, I encountered a profile I wrote of the celebrated photographer Bernice Abbott. It had been published in 1990 in Mirabella, then a smart new women's magazine, named for its editor, a former editor-in-chief of Vogue. Rereading the piece now, in our times of disinformation and confusion and made-up truth, I was struck anew by the clarity of Abbott's eye and her work. And I thought about how important Abbott was back then, and what a strong example she set as she tried to make sense of the 20th century. She died in 1901, so her life is history now, a story to tell, and an important one as cities begin to change before our lives. What a strong example, she said as she tried to make sense. Oh, I don't know. I really am confused by all this, but I think I'm through with my introduction. I've heard it several times. Last summer, at the opening or gala show at the New York Public Library, the Master American. I'm really sorry. I may have to wait a minute or something because I really am hearing everything 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, it's really bothering you. You know what? Why don't we have David come on and do his reading, and then I could try and troubleshoot with you.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
All right. All right, I'm going to take you off screen for now. All right, guys. So while Elizabeth gets that under wraps, I'm going to introduce David. So up next, we have a reading from David Tomas Martinez. David's debut collection of poetry, Puzzle, was released in 2014 by Sarah Band Books, which won the New England Book Festival's prize in poetry, the Devil's Kitchen Reading Award, and honorable mention in the Antonio Cisneros del Moral Prize. He is the 2015 winner of the Verlaine Poetry Prize from Imprint. Martinez's most recent selection of poetry, Post-Traumatic Hood Disorder, was published in 2018, also by Sarah Band Books. He is a Pushcart Prize winner and an NEA recipient. Please welcome David Tomas Martinez. Hi. Thank you for bearing with us. I'm going to let you read, and I'm going to work with Elizabeth behind the scenes.
Okay.
Right.
The first poem that I will read is from my first book. It's called The Only Mexican. I wrote this for my grandfather. I'm from San Diego, California, and I was getting a PhD at the University of Houston at the time, and so I was going back and forth, and it was a trip to be doing PhD work in Houston and come home and helping my family tear down their family home to build a new one. So about that experience. The only Mexican. The only Mexican that ever was Mexican fought in the revolution and drank nightly, and like all machos, crawled into work crudo, letting his breath twirl, then clap and sing before sandpaper juiced the metal. The only Mexican to never sit in a Catholic pew was born on Halloween and ate his lunch wrapped in foil against the fence with the other Mexicans. They fixed old forge where my grandfather worked for years. Him and the welder Juan wagered each year on who would return first to the Yucatan. Neither did. When my aunts leave, my dad paces the living room and then rests like a jaguar who once drank rain off the leaves of cecropia trees, but now caged bends his paw on a speaker to watch crowds pass. He asked me to watch Grandpa, which means for the day. In town for 2 weeks, I have tried my best to avoid this. Many times he will swear, and many times Grandpa will ask to get in and out of bed. Want a sweater, he will ask the time. He will use the toilet, frequently ask for beer, about dinner when the Padres play. ¿Por qué no novelas? About bed. He will ask about his house, grandma, to sit outside. He will question while answering. He will smirk. He will invent languages while tucked in bed. He will bump the table, tap the couch. He will lose his slipper, wedging it in the wheel of his chair. Like a small child trapped in a well, everyone will care. He will cry without tears, a broken carburetor of sobs. When I speak Spanish, he shakes his head and reminds me he is the only Mexican. So I'll read 2 poems from my second collection, Post-Traumatic Hood Disorder. This is the/A train. This is a New York poem. I live in New York City. I live in Brooklyn now. And I wrote this after a couple years ago, after another shooting of a black male in Florida. And the police officer shot the black male, who was a caregiver for the developmentally disabled adult. And when he was just walking, doing his job, and the officer shot him. And when the man asked the officer why he shot him, the officer said, "I don't know," and he was obviously like freaking out himself. So I was angered. I was frustrated. It was a couple years ago when the media was really highlighting this, but as a person of color, as a brown person growing up in an urban environment, this is something that surprised me. So the anger was intense in many ways. So this is the/A train. A honey badger's skin can withstand multiple blows from machetes, arrows, and spears, but these rusted weapons haven't killed anything in years. So that may be the lesson there, that there is no there. Like many poems, like many revolutions. And maybe there isn't a there in many people, only that foggy, anachronistic lizard eye, or what I have come to call the part of consciousness that builds impediments, isolates the super Trump, or what New Yorkers call subways, or what a king calls a dream, or what X called Y, what the crowd yells is lit, the cave calls dim. Jose, can you see in West Tejas, a fancy evening out is rocking on the porch. Ain't they good at irony? We're watching the fugitive moon run away, takes days, like the time I caught the C I hoped was an A, and saw a butterfly move in what I can only say is protest. The wings made small combustions through the car, eyes trained. The awful is tracked by awe. An officer lifts his gun, yells to raise your hands higher, the TV letters. Watch it. They will call you moth and kill you. The next poem I'll read is called Found Fragment on Ambition. There's no explanation necessary. If a hood is a sense of place, and a sense of place is identity, then identity is a hood, and adulthood is being insecure in any hood. A hood scares the whitest folks. Why folks scared to stop in the hood, and why folks stop wearing a hood and call it white nationalism. If I tried, I would fail to pass. If I failed, I would try to pass. When can I retire my bowl, stop needing to beg for my personhood? You see, academically, my ghetto pass was revoked. Please, sir, can you direct me to the window to turn in my man card? Where can I apply to enter the whiteness protection program? I've lost my found. Identity is a hood. A hood is a sense of place. A place places a hood in us. So I'm gonna read a poem from the book that I'm reading, or excuse me, I'm writing now. Yeah, so there's another poem. I don't think you need anything to say about it. The first line of the poem is the title, though, so I'll just go. Always be completely discreet is what my mom taught me about beauty. The ABCDs of being a lady, or in my case, she would add a gentleman. She herself, however, has never been pretty quiet. When she was younger, the neighbors nicknamed her Tomboy. She still believes an Olympic gold in Moscow was her future, if not for boycotts and getting knocked up at 15. My formative years anchored her dating years. I knew before my dad that their divorce had already happened. That was a lot to run around with at 12. She used to internalize her attractiveness as heavy legs. So difficult turning down the advances of dentists and lesbians. I'm just athletic, she'd protest. My mom was pretty quiet when I told her that Uncle X and Uncle Y had molested me, which I didn't exactly tell her, but she read in between the lines of a poem in my book. A year later, in a park, while we watched my third child run around swings and slides, my dad didn't know how to ask how I felt or even if I'd been molested, so he settled on asking if I was gay. It was said with heavy legs. We sat pretty quiet. It was 2 weeks post-surgery and a year from recovery because I'd pushed my body too hard. I listed the names of the former professional athletes in my Sunday pickup game. He kind of joked and kind of poked when saying, "Who'd you blow to get in that game?" "I'm just athletic," I protested. The last poem that I'll read is another new poem. It is, gotta find it quickly. Oh, there it is. Okay. Took me a second to find it. This is called trap music, which is a type of hip hop that deals with, it's a new sort of genre, or excuse me, style of rap music. It's based in the South, basically like a sort of very urban, centered around dealing drugs. Wet Charles dropped by the homeboys in his busted high-top burgundy chucks, hand out for a buck or two from us young bucks also rocking chucks, trying to cop a couple ends for a few gallons of gas or diapers for his newborn daughter. Wet Charles could spin into splits, quick to say he never begged, traded, or borrowed anything he couldn't first steal. The highest point in many homes is the attic. The jester's hat jingles. The dope fiend's pipe rings. Is it the fire or the smoke that makes a comedian? Even when I mad dogged Charles, telling him to kick rocks with his ashy as hell chucks, I never actually looked into the stones of his eyes. I had known him since childhood. We all had, before he began chasing a rock up and down a hill, stoned every day. Think of addiction as never being able to find your phone. We were not embarrassed by Charles, but what we might one day become. The way bigger sand tiger shark embryos feed on smaller embryos in the womb. We served classmates we joked with in gym. Dropping out of high school my senior year is what a sentencing judge called circumstances. We never understood why the police chuckled circumstances as the reason for harassing us when we stood in a circle smoking on the block. Charles didn't dozen about dope, just surged in the circuit looking for ways to get high, biking from the trolley to the four corners of death, the intersection of Euclid and Imperial, Green Cat Liquor, Real Taco Shop, the gas station, what was Huffman's Barbecue, where the only constant were entrepreneurial young men setting up corners in front of constantly changing businesses with hastily painted front windows, where the persistence of the sea in Chicken Shack could still be seen on the glass door of the new no-contract cell phone store. Archetypes have a way of worming into beauty. The flaw is the small writing of a hero. Through what crack did Orpheus sneak a minute fire from hell? The sweet chemical scent of someone smoking rock in a broken light bulb is a plasticity I can't forget. I didn't pay no mind the moralism of Nancy Reagan's Dare or eggs in a skillet. The commercials of the commercials of my youth in the 80s. As we went most of those dampened days lighting something or other, lighting the mercurial philosophies of Ice Cube, Wu-Tang, Spice One, or Sugar Free. We smoked water, or what a hip toxologist might nasally call angel dust. You can be full of agua and not well. If you're not careful, time will find you a fiend. I'm told that rappers name themselves now with Lil or Young, followed by a randomly chosen abstraction, Lil E.G., Young I.E. Back in the stone age of hip hop in the early 90s, late 80s, so the stories go, rappers went in the kitchen and whatever they had milk and honey of, voila, they had their stage name. I was just another empty, scattered rapper on a sidewalk in the city. That's how I became Slim Jim. So that was more about stealing cars than beef. The first time I got jumped, I was kicked so hard in the face, I found my beanie 5 feet from me. In the Navy, they call that taking your lid off. We'd spend summer evenings at the wooden roller coaster in Pacific Beach, never going on the ride, but circling the beautiful boardwalk that was only slightly less majestic than one of the older homies' car, a black primer painted glasshouse convertible with 3 white walls and one ever altering spare. Everything was so gorgeous in the back seat of that Impala with our hardtop off. The moon so brilliant in the sky, it was quite the shiner. I'd watch the women around my way rub petroleum jelly on their forehead, then their cheekbones before a fight. Taking off your golden earrings does not make hearing the truth any easier. But that water made the bass and elasticated cadence of Pocket Full of Stones even more resonant as we waded the highways home from the roller coaster with a trunk full of 18-inch box speakers rattling our bodies. 6 16-year-olds in the cramped backseat of a Datsun wagon trying to release our own trapped music. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, David. It's always so special when writers come on and share work that hasn't been published yet. So thank you. Okay, so I'm going to check in with Elizabeth and see if the echo has gone away.
Shall I say something?
Yes. How is it
Okay.
sounding?
It's better.
It's better?
It was really a nightmare before.
Okay,
No,
good.
I may be hearing it again, but I'll go slowly at first, I guess.
Yes, you know what? I love virtual events because everybody gets to see the behind the scenes. Somebody said that it might. Oh, oh no. All right. Well, while I add Elizabeth again, we're going to have Kate now. We have Kate Lehrer next. Kate is the author of 4 novels, of which Out of Eden won the Western Heritage Award in Outstanding Fiction for its artistic quality and historical accuracy. She writes short stories, essays, and book reviews, and has been published in various anthologies. Kate was a frequent panelist on Diane Rem's Reader's Review on NPR and a founding member of Penn Faulkner. Please welcome to the screen, Kate Lehrer.
Hi.
Hi. And I'm not echoing or anything. So this is good.
Yeah, you sound good to me. All right, I'll let you get to it. Hopefully we can get Elizabeth back on.
Bridget. I'm sure we can. She's too good to miss, so it's going to happen. I'm reading from my novel, Confessions of a Bigamist. I started just to read little excerpts from one thing and another, and then I decided, well, this was actually very important. As you will see as I'm reading, I'm hitting you over the head with it, but it's about really, because I was really worried at the time, and this is over 20 years ago, about how our country, how absolutes are always there in this country. I grew up in Texas and there were lots of absolutes there. So at any rate, I've tried to incorporate it in a novel, which I hope is funny as well as says something important. Did I wake you? A male voice. I struggled to open my eyes. Wake me? I did, a guilty male voice. I tucked my cell phone next to my ear. I was dreaming, something about my vines, I mumbled. A laugh. Go back to sleep. I miss you. Me too, I answered. That's all I wanted to hear. He hung up. I willed myself into consciousness. Someone was missing. No, missing me. But whose voice? A husband, that's whose. Suddenly alert, I groped for a bedside lamp and tried to orient myself. Soft light suffused the room's surfaces, which were dense with cream and white and ivory. I saw built-in cabinets and the mound of feather pillows that encircled me. A row of mirrored doors reflected the myriad lights that served the city as stars in this last decade of the 20th century. New York, definitely. Fifth Avenue, upper 90s, overlooking Central Park. This was a home I shared with my husband, Steve Banyan, for 28 years, my only husband, and a fine one. When we married, I was happy to be Michelle Banyan, as our friends knew me. Serenity usually reigned within these walls, but now crumpled pages of my notebook were scattered over the floor, on the bed, on my night table, my pencils in equal disarray. A half-peeled orange, a soiled white towel, my white silk panties and two lace gowns lay about in various states of abandon. I sank back down into the bed and shut my eyes. Who was that on the phone? A husband. Someone was missing me. Me too, I'd said, for I was missing me. Not so long ago, I had rode merrily along in the shallows of my life, innocent, oblivious. Now I was groping wildly in rough waters, and the boat was definitely in danger of tipping. If only I'd been good at reading signs. The first sign might have been 8 months earlier, when I was running late. I hate being late, but Steve hated my lateness even more. He was never late, but I got sidelined by an unexpected call at the office. Professionally, I am Daisy Straight, a name I'd invented. Until I did it, I never thought I'd take a pseudonym, professionally or otherwise. As Daisy, I wrote a monthly column for a dusty but sincere women's magazine and hopscotched across the country, luxurying the frazzled and hopeful about how to take the clutter out of life. How late am I? I asked my assistant. Well, she began softly, and I didn't even give her time to finish as I ran down 2 flights of stairs. As my cab lurched over the city, I took off my black framed glasses and undid the clasp that kept my hair pulled back neatly at work, brushed out my chin length, almost natural blonde bob, and pulled down my long bangs. I was proud of my smooth mane. I opened my compact and rubbed away what was left of dark red lipstick I wore at the office, and then applied a more subdued mocha. I pressed my lips together. Voila, Michelle Banyan, 47 years old, the fairly reserved, fairly sophisticated wife of a 50-year-old international lawyer en route to dinner at Jean Georges. I took one last look and snapped the compact shut as the as I got out of the taxi. We're glad you decided to come, Steve said, his drollness trumping my apology as he jumped up to pull my chair out for me. More a pouncer than a pacer, my husband was always alert, anticipatory, focused, qualities that made him an excellent and well rewarded lawyer. I made the mistake of taking one last call, I explained, quickly sliding in between Matt Rogers and Buzzy Simpson. And this woman was in hysterics. I couldn't cut her off. I'm sorry. I nodded toward the others, who muttered sympathetically. Steve said nothing. He was leaving the next day for an 8-week stay in Hong Kong. I'm sorry, I repeated. Um, Let me see where I went next with this. I scanned the menu quickly. Everyone else had ordered. Decide, Steve said firmly. He hated indecisiveness more than tardiness. Even grays were categorized by him as black or white. For Steve, happiness was a world of absolutes, a sentiment that appealed to me in the beginning. I hated laughs, ambiguities, and believed for a long time that he might stave them off. I looked at the waiter. What do you suggest? I asked. Go for the soul, said Marin encouragingly. The soul, I nodded, and went along with that. Over the years, I'd come to view my role as the provider of punctuation marks in our friends' conversations, not the periods or exclamation points, mind you, more the commas, hyphens, and ellipses, maybe a semicolon, and frequently a question mark. As an organizing consultant, I facilitated daily living. As Michelle, I facilitated conversations. Even as a girl, I liked the idea of keeping parts of myself to myself. Um, Mostly, I tended to follow other people's scripts, having I developed that habit as I was growing up. Then, for let me see, I'm going to skip over. I keep skipping around so I can get as much in as possible in my allotted time. Um, Matt Rogers is talking to about how wonderful his wife is and how very organized she is, and that maybe she could give, Michelle a tip because he knows she is a professional organizer, but it, of course, infuriates her. Matt, I finally managed to interject. Do you feel you have a center? Well, I am the center, he said, surprised, thinking I was referring to his company. Others run the day to day stuff. I'm not much for details. I am, I asserted. He shrugged. I thought about my center, whether it was like a room to walk into and how one could possibly hold it. And then I lost myself in the hum of voices, the glowing candles, and pale yellow wine, while the music, like a trick birthday candle you think you've blown out, ended again until the final unresolved chord. Have I got time? Okay, I will just start this and see if we can do a little bit about Daisy Strait. She's on an early plane the next morning going to Fort Worth to make a lecture, one of her lectures, to a convention. Um, and as Daisy Strait, she says, I was quite the ham. I was standing, by late morning, I was standing in full Daisy makeup. Engaged and enthusiastic, my voice began its kneading. Today we focus on your life as it can be with proper care and feeding. You say, hey, you have no extra time for one more thing in your life.
even if that one more thing is you. In that case, rule number one is this: stop letting people, chores, or events wreak havoc with your destiny. The women nodded and were pleased. They wanted to be cared for, they wanted to be fed, and they looked to Daisy straight. Are you burdened by paper clutter? The piles of mail that never seem to disappear? Rule number two: don't open anything that doesn't look relevant and dispose of the rest promptly. The same goes with people clutter, I said sternly. Rule number three: think of people in the same way you do your papers. I could feel the women recoil slightly. Are my methods ruthless? A little, I said, and then I whispered, but act nice and you'll get away with it. I winked. The women laughed, not because I was funny, but because they liked me. They liked being told what to do. I urged them to banish guilt as a waste of energy. If you don't feel right about it without it, save it for when you fail yourself. Looking out at the sea of well turned out faces, I saw the weariness and struggle that wavered underneath their public mask. Reinventing myself was like an insurance policy, a fallback position to count on. If I failed at being Michelle, then maybe I could succeed as Daisy. People cared about Daisy. Don't forget, there are crimes against the spirit, I exhorted. Your spirit. Those are the crimes you have to watch out for, or else you will end up with no spirit left at all, no self left. And then it she goes on. Afterwards, she's getting ready to go to a barbecue, where we meet Wilson, who becomes another man in her life. And this is really the transition between, well, from going from Daisy to a very single focused professional woman, to Michelle, the slightly suppressed wife, to a fairly lust driven, adventurous, you know, that's what she's doing. She's on the way to doing that before she marries the second one again. So the name of the book is Confessions of a Bigamist, and it just goes on. Anyway, I was just trying to talk about that idea of the good and the bad and the evil and all those shades of gray, as I think a woman has written a book about, having nothing to do with mine. Okay.
So Elizabeth is having some tech problems tonight, unfortunately. So if you both want to go ahead and get started with the conversation, feel free. Hopefully we'll be able to get her back on by the end. But yeah, she's having some computer problems. So we're going to keep going without her for now.
Well, shall I just start? Should I say something to David?
Yes, go right ahead.
Or how do we do this?
Go right ahead. You guys can talk about whatever you would like for this evening.
What would you like to talk about?
Okay. Yes, what would you like to talk about, David? I love your poems, and I felt very guilty reading this very, very flighty book about this very flighty woman. But after hearing yours and your wonderful concrete images, which just are so wonderful, which go along so well with what you're talking about. I thought
thank you.
Thank you. Marvelous.
But I mean, any person finding who they are as a person, and sort of it sounds like your character's in a real existential crisis of trying to figure out morally, philosophically who they are, and there were images. For me, that really stuck, like the white silk panties, like it being a sort of
yeah,
those I mean,
the very upper class,
right, you know what I mean, they're emblematic of a time, and also obviously the color and purity and such. And I don't think it's flighty at all. I mean, I appreciate your kindness, but I mean It's really hard to read a novel in like an excerpt, right? Like 10 minutes, 12 minutes.
It's
I always feel
really important, really hard. I've cut that chapter down all day long, trying to get it all in. And my daughter is sitting there, and she finally did a wrap up. I couldn't say the rest, but she's just on her way to sin.
well, I guess we all are in some way or other.
Yes. Yeah, I think so, probably. Yeah. But I thought what you did, how long do you spend a lot of time with each poem, or how does that work for you?
It depends. I mean, my process will vary. I've had poems that take, my first book took about 10 years to write, as I was just in that, I was developing who I was as a poet. It's my first, your first book, it sort of takes, you really have to, it went through many variations, but there were poems that sort of stuck. And I didn't know that they would stick, but so that, but now there are poems that I've been working on for 3-4 years that'll be in this next book that I didn't want to put in my second book, but I was like, because I was like, it's not really, they didn't feel finished, or they didn't feel like they were appropriate stylistically, because they felt I was doing something slightly different, and it didn't feel like it would work. So, but then there's poems, like I've written right now. I currently have a poem oh my goodness, I'm forgetting the in Rhode Island, but I forget Providence, on one of the buses, on buses in the Providence. So like that poem I wrote in one day, like the whole poem, like I just thought of it. But it's only a 6-8 line poem. So like, it's very, 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 very short. It's a very succinct idea. And that poem took it took a day. The thought came to me, and I was tinkering with it. And next thing I know, I was like, that feels finished. And it was done. So,
that's the kind of thing you dream of happening to you. That when you think, and then it comes. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
and not
the
much
poems,
rewriting. Yeah.
It's lately I sleep most hours of the day, not because I'm depressed, but so it's not to give up on my dreams. So I mean, it's very like,
like that.
That's not, that's one little idea. So I've been reading it a lot lately, because as they were going over the font typeface, and so like I was like, so I had so anyways, and your process
is hard. Mine just changes with the book. I had the idea for this, but I also had been for the idea of absolutes and growing up with people, either very right or very left. And I think I, in my heart of hearts, wish I could ever be that smug. I've just never felt very smug. So I've envied that, I realized finally, maybe after I finish this book.
Right.
But to have a theme like this, that I could really talk about those things that mattered to me, felt important, and what is tragedy really? As I was thinking, I think it was Isaiah Berlin, and just frankly didn't have time to look it up today, but I was thinking about the idea of how we want to hold two opposing thoughts in our head.
Yeah.
And how hard it is if we do that. And that's why people fall over either end, I think, to try to go one way or the other. I see Betsy up there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that makes me think of that line. The difference between a tragedy and comedy is that tragedies end in everyone dying, and comedies end in marriages.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and this one ends in what can she do? But
Hello?
But talking about yes. Okay.
Kate and David.
Okay. We can hear you.
You might want to
And
turn your.
Cannot.
No.
Did you keep, no, we.
I have been all over the world trying to get back on.
You might want to turn off your
Elizabeth,
phone.
I think turn your phone off.
Yeah.
I did. Just
There we
checking.
go.
Perfect.
All right.
You're live. We did it.
I had 2 minutes of double talk and then I went blank. Barbara Gunn, asking a question.
Feedback is pretty vicious.
It is.
Wow. It's it's a lot of
Where are
vicious.
we?
Yeah.
Well, do you throw poems away? Let's just go back to
Okay.
do you throw much away?
Yeah, no, of course. I
Yes.
at some point though, I think I feel whether something has heat, and then sometimes it doesn't ever get to that place. But what I also do is sort of keep a mental note of what parts work in a poem, because sometimes I think what happens is that a writer will get, or say a scene, right? Like for you, like we get
Right.
fixated on
Yeah.
one particular aspect of a scene or a poem, and we like that, and we try to
Yes.
make that stand for what is successful, and that isn't always the case,
Yeah.
right? So for me, it'll be an image or a
Exactly.
line or what I'm trying to lead the reader to, but sometimes I'm not able to do that. So one of the lectures I have is on transitions, and so obviously what it sort of presupposes is that you're able to like write a good line or a good idea or something like that, or say you can have a scene, but it like really talks about focusing how to transition one scene to the next scene. Or because in poems, in my poems, sometimes they'll jump around, and so you have to learn how to like connect scenes. It's similar to like how you may have to connect
Right.
chapters, or you have one scene move into the next, but you want it all to be in one chapter, and or all of those things. So I mean, I definitely focus on that. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll keep a mental note and say, okay, I really like this, and then as I'm working on another poem, it'll say, this would be the perfect place. So sometimes it works, sometimes
That's
it
good.
doesn't. So
Right.
do you
But
keep a
always
journal
worth
like
a
that?
try.
Yeah.
I keep a journal where I write things down. And then if I'm working on a book, I'll try to make them fit in. And sometimes they'll be the best lines in my life, I'll think. And there is no place they're ever going to work in any book, probably. Yeah.
Right.
I do things like that, though. Then I wrote one book that Out of Eden, which was that really a historical novel. And I just loved research. I don't know, you don't have to do that much research on the ones at least you read. You may have to, but I researched that because it was late. It was 1890s really when it took place. These two women had moved to Kansas and how hard life was and everything. But I loved, first they meet in Paris. So I'd written practically a novel on Paris because it was so interesting at the time. Then I would write whatever I was researching, I would write and write and write and wait for my editor to say, the book just kept going forever. And she kept saying, cut this down or take it down. And I would take a chapter. So I'd written a chapter on the death of James Garfield. And I thought about reading that tonight because the country loved James Garfield. And when he was assassinated, he lived for, I don't know, a couple of months, I think it was. But people all over this country they loved him. And they all marched to the post office because it was the one federal spot in all the towns. So I was looking back at Out of Eden, and I was looking to see where that was because it had given me chill bumps when I wrote it. So I thought, oh, that must be a good American scene kind of thing. Well, it turned out it was one paragraph long by the time I had cut it down. It was just not even a good paragraph. It was just like a first grader's paragraph, and I ended up by saying it was moving. Like, you figure it out why it was moving. I don't know, anymore. But that kind of thing where you just really, you think you're going somewhere and you go nowhere at all. Right. And I would have been smarter to take the whole thing out.
That's funny. I mean, the way I do research in my poems, yes. While there might be generally some sort of idea that I want to interject, and then I'll like, oh, wait a second, I don't have a good, like, say I'll take a comment by Sartre or something like that, and I'm like, oh, wait a second, let me make sure that I know what this essay is talking about, and because what you don't want to do is you want to interject or like, some thinker. And then you're like, oh, wait a second, I remember it being this, but it's really that. And then it like, whatever implicit argument you have in this poem, that it sort of nullifies,
Yeah, I know. That's in fact what I was doing with this Isaiah Berlin thing today, because I thought, what exactly did he say? How much am I misquoting him? I don't know. I don't know where it was, and I've got to go look it up again somewhere. But
yeah, it also motivates. It also motivates me to read more and think more about different things, and so I think of that as a form of research as well. I find that
it is
different sort of books, whether it be philosophy or just thinking, generative, and it more than say reading at this point in my career, reading poems are generative. Like, I've read a good deal of the canon, not most of the canon, I've read a good deal of the canon. And I've tried to stay as on top of contemporary poetry and literature, but like what really moves me to want to write, is when I'll run across a great idea or something. I'm like, oh man, I hadn't thought of it like that, or or even a nonfiction book. I just read Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow by Kahneman, who won a Nobel for that.
Yes.
It's a good book. It was interesting.
Book. Yeah. Fascinating.
It is. And I was like, oh man, you just sort of put that stuff in the back of your mind, and it's not only is it good for at a party in New York about, oh yes, I read that, and we can talk about it. But it's also something that some point of it may jump into a poem that I'll either mimic or overtly reference. I mean,
right.
So. I all think of that as research too. I mean,
Well,
this gives my partner and I something to talk about. I'm like, oh man, I read this, and she'll do the same thing to me.
Yes. That's good. Turnabout's fair play.
Yes, of course.
Exactly.
Of course.
Yes.
Hi guys.
Hi,
I hate to cut in because you guys are having such a wonderful conversation, but we're almost at 8:00. So unfortunately, Elizabeth was having tech problems, so she couldn't make it on tonight. But hopefully, I know, I am too. Hopefully we'll get her on for another episode of Write America, though. We have many more episodes in the works, so hopefully we'll be able to get her on at some point. But I just wanted to thank you both for being on here. Oh, sorry, what were you saying, Kate?
Well, I was just going to say that what Betsy's talking about, her subject of that woman, sounds fascinating. Mm-hmm. She told me a little bit about it a while ago, and it just sounds like it's wonderful. So I'm hoping she you got your problems worked out.
Yeah, it's always a
Yeah.
risk when you're doing virtual events because you never know what's going to happen and who's going to have tech
Boy,
problems.
yeah.
But you know, when they come together, they really are so great and powerful. So I just wanted to thank both of you for being here tonight and participating. I also wanted to thank Roger Rosenblatt, who dreamed all of this up. For everyone who's watching, don't forget to click the button below to visit bookreview.com to get your hands on signed copies of David and Elizabeth and Kate's books. And we hope to see you here next Monday at 7 p.m. for another episode of Right America with Joyce Maynard and Adrienne Unger. So thank you so much to you both. We will see everyone next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
David.
Bye. It was nice to meet you.
Bye. So nice to meet you. Yes.